blessed to have all you wonderful speakers just enlighten us about greenness, about alchemy, about al-Khidr. My name is Kristine Backer. I'd like to just quickly ask you a question, Abdul, about al-Khidr, a fascinating figure, one of the prophets in the Quran. But could you just flesh out his character, his personality a little bit? It's a mystical legend, but we don't really know where did he live, how did he get this knowledge from the divine presence?
Well, as far as I know, briefly, very little about. He was the son of a king at some time in his life. That's how the story goes. And then he was on a journey with the soldiers one day, and then he found that well, and he drank from it. And apparently, no one else saw that well, and it was destined to be only for him. And it's known as the water of life, and that's where you get his divine knowledge and direct knowledge, rather. And he seems to have this flourished life. He was the son of a king. He's got everything all there for him, but then he left all that behind.
And where did he live? Where was his life?
I'm not sure, to be honest. To be fair, I don't want to say so, but probably from my readings, which I don't know necessarily if it's 100%. Not the Persian land or around that land, but I am also. It's very hard because, to be honest, what is talked about the Khidr, rather more his guidance and his spiritual guidance through the history, and that was his acknowledgement actually more details than his real name even or where he comes from. How he lives. That's the thing. More.
And is there any more guidance than those verses you mentioned from the Quran?
He was referred to the Quran actually only on those verses. It was 22 verses. The very famous story about Moses and the Khidr. There are hadiths or stories by Sufi masters, plenty. But as far as the Quran is concerned, as far as I know, it's in the Quran. It's only Surah Al-Kahf, or the chapter of the cave. Yeah, so also with regard to Khidr, like I said, mentioned in the Quran, chapter of the cave, the story of Moses and Khidr. At the end of the journey with Moses, he did tell him that what he mentioned to him was all against the rational mind, was what Moses seen was all stories against his rational mind, which is what Khidr from the Quranic narrative said as the ta'weel of what he couldn't bear to understand, and hence it's always Moses was not patient because and that's the word ta'weel is quite significant here because it's like it comes from an awwal, which is the start or the initial, the primordial meaning of things. So it's almost like linking to what Guy was saying earlier about things have to come back to where it starts from. When we see it in a rather more esoteric meaning.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Anybody else have a question?
Yes, I have a question for Guy. Guy, thank you for your talk, by the way. It was a fascinating insight into the world of alchemy. Specifically, how do you think that the actual practice of these traditional sciences, if that's the right expression, actually then went on to have a practical effect precisely upon the souls of those who practiced it?
I think it's a question of identification. And it's an identification which develops from intimacy. And it's an intimacy which is brought about in the first place by appreciation. And appreciation is a very interesting word in the English language because it suggests if you appreciate what I'm saying, then you perceive some value in what I'm saying, you understand what I'm saying, you recognize what I'm saying. And if you have sufficient interest, then it will grow. Rather like if you have gold in your bank, for example, and if there's sufficient interest, then it will grow in value. So there is this very interesting thing with nature. If you're interested enough, and you approach something with appreciation, there's an intimacy that forms, and nature will reveal herself to you more deeply. And she's also a mirror. So we find ourselves in that which we are exploring. And we find that the processes which we bring to bear upon the matter that we're working with, it's not just as above, so below, it's as within, so without, as without, so within. So everything is mirroring everything else. There's this beautiful dance, if you like, to use a sort of Venusian idea, there is a love play going on. And in a sense, life itself is a love story. And in a love story, we find our partners. And nature is this partner who joins in with us, who leads us to our true partner, which is ultimately our true resting place and our true identity, which is the divine.
Could you give us the etymology of the word alchemy?
Well, alchem. Chem is the old word for Egypt, which means the black land. So Achem is the black land, and it's called Lower Egypt is called the Black Land because every year the Nile would flood, and the great plains of the Nile Delta and Lower Egypt would be turned black by the highly fertile alluvial soils of the Nile. But there's also a sense that the black may refer to, as it were, the black arts. So in the sort of titillation of the occult, the idea that alchemy is one of the black arts in terms of being somehow dark. But there are other derivations which are kind of interesting as well, like kumia. Kumia is a Greek word which is related to chemistry, but there's also this idea of extracting juices from plants, which also takes you right back to the very beginning of the alchemical work, which is working with the plants.
So the Arabic word alchemia is just from those two roots that you're talking about, the original Egyptian or the Greek.
Well, you get this merging of the Greek and at the dawn of alchemy in the West, because there's a separate tradition, more ancient in terms of being recorded in China. And we're going back to the Yellow Emperor, way BC, hundreds of years BC. And then we have the Rasayana tradition of Indian alchemy, which both have slightly different emphases, if you like. The pursuit of gold, of course, being the colouring one in the West, in some ways, unfortunately. But we have this melding of the Greek and the Egyptian, and you have that with Thoth, who's equated with Hermes, and then Hermes Trismegistus, who's the author, supposedly, of the Emerald Tablet. He is a fusion of Thoth and Hermes, and he's also not just divine, he becomes a man, so he's mediating from the semi-divine man to the actual man, and we have this synthesis, if you like, which had proved rather like the soils of the Nile to be extremely fertile.
Could we have Anila Kani's question that was sent in by email
Who wants a little bit
to
first?
Tom? That goes to Tom.
Can I just say this probably has to be the last this time? That's good.
We can edit out that little interruption so Kristine can read it as a flow. You don't even need my bit there, we can edit that out, go straight to the question. Have you got it?
Yep. All right. So there's a question from that came in on WhatsApp or email electronically. Could you comment on the eschatological significance of the greenness in relation to the golden ratio?
Well, hopefully I'll be using the words eschatological, understanding it in the way that Ali means. geometry by its very nature is to do with, I suppose, the end of a process, or it's the finalisation of the descent of number from the divine mind. And so in that sense, greenness and the golden ratio are the finalising of something that's begun from, I suppose you'd say, from the one, or from the divine mind. And so in that sense, I suppose there is something to do with the end of a process, or the end of time, the transmuting of time into space, or number becoming completely fixed and set, which is really the emphasis of geometry, whereas, say, for instance, music is more about the unfolding of number over time, whereas geometry is the final transmuting into space. So hopefully that answers.
There's another good question here. In the final chapter of his book, Green Man, Earth Angel, Tom Cheetham offers a connection between an understanding of inner knowledge, the Ta'wil of Ritter, and the vision brought in Henri Corbin's writing of the Harmonia Abrahamica. Could you comment on this connection between hermeneutics and harmony?
I mean, with hermeneutics, if that's talking about an understanding of some sort of a tradition, then that's going to be coming from a particular angle, so I suppose geometrically speaking, a particular radius within the circle, and no radii run parallel with one another. So having some sort of connection to the meeting point itself would be presumably where there can be a recognition of the harmony of these different radii that are going in different directions. But the centre of the circle itself is a dimensionless point, so it's beyond form, so it has to be, I suppose, a recognition of a transcendent unity, whereas the pathways themselves are all different. But they move closer. I think Martin Leeds always used to say how the pathways move closer as they reach the centre of the circle, so there's more of a possibility of communication between different pathways.
Well, God bless you.